The latest trend in developed world interest rates rising means the cost of borrowing money is increasing. This poses a greater burden on development finance institutions who are in the business of funding development at rates far lower than commercial banks. While challenged by higher interest rates, FDIs are trying to be innovative in keeping funding costs down. Investment in infrastructure development is one of the themes being explored at the World Economic Forum in Davos today. And our reporter Nompumelelo Siziba is standing by to tell us more about this development and other issues that are being discussed there. Well, good afternoon and welcome, Nompu.
Thanks very much, Colin. Indeed, you touched on the issue of infrastructure. That's one of the issues that's being discussed at the moment. And as we know, on the African continent, we do have many challenges, access to power and decent transmission lines, access to water, transport links, and so on. As a result, our poor infrastructure right across from Cape to Cairo means that trade, intra-African trade, currently stands at around 13%, which is really very low. And so now DFIs, that is your development finance institutions, are concerned somewhat that interest rates are on the rise, but they do say that there are ways and means that they can counteract that so that they get funds from elsewhere that don't necessarily bear higher interest rates. I spoke earlier with the CEO of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, that's Patrick Dlamini. And he was saying that the challenges are very real, but he's quite optimistic. Here's what he had to say.
Interest rate has got very bad implication for us as DFIs because it says our cost of funding goes up. What then becomes important would be for us to come up with credit enhancement skill sets and working with credit enhancement agencies like, for instance, the current agents of the World Bank, MEGA, and also accessing donor funding, accessing concessionary funding, which then, when blended into the project financing, lowers the cost of the project financing. So we need to be very innovative in really ensuring that we structure our projects in such a way that investors are comfortable and are able to crystallize the economics of the project, because then they are able to price the funding of our projects much more competitively.
So, Nompu, given that the South African delegation is out there in full force, how have they been received and what other issues have been discussed there today?
Well, yes, as was mentioned a couple of days ago when we were focused quite keenly on Team SA, you've got about 70 strong South Africans, heavyweights in their own rights, in government, in business, labour and civil society that have come out. Even in academia, we have Max Price, who's also out here. He's the Vice Chancellor of UCT. So you have all of these big wigs, so to speak. They're out here and they're out in full force and they're interacting with people. I think they're being received very well. You know, this is a forum for dialogue, and everyone has got an open ear. People are listening to each other, and hopefully, you know, the big question mark, you know, some of those who are cynics out there saying that these types of things are talk shops, hopefully it translates into benefits that accrue not to the people who come here, but to the members of the populations of the countries that these people come from. So that's what we ultimately hope for. But in terms of what else is being discussed today, for example, they're talking about global risks, and the World Economic Forum came out with a report a couple of days ago saying that inequality actually posed one of the biggest risks, and this had been demonstrated in the way that people had decided to vote in terms of Brexit, and even some people say in terms of Donald Trump. He was the unlikely candidate, but people believe that the white working class decided to vote for him because there's a lot of politics of division, that black people, Latinos and so on and so forth are the reason for all the wrongs and all the unemployment and all the difficulties that people have and so on and so forth. This is one argument, of course. So inequality being one, cybercrime, businesses and governments are faced with this huge problem of being infiltrated by forces outside via technology. How do you deal with that type of issue? And then there's the revamping of the education system globally in order to cater for the new technological era that we live in. We can't be educated in the same way that we were 5 or 10 years ago. That needs to change. How do you go about doing that? And then issues around market forces. You know, there's a real feeling, it comes back to this issue of inequality. There's a real feeling that the economic market system does not work fairly. You've got so many people who are poor, as Oxfam reported the other day, stating that 3.6 billion people living in poverty. And you've got 8 men or women who are billionaires whose wealth exceeds that of those 3.6 billion people. So the unfairness that's there, people are looking to address it. One of the issues being looked at is executive pay. How do you ensure that that's fair, that it's in line with the actual performance of companies and so on and so forth? How do you ensure that people are not driven by short-term needs like greed and profits, and rather long-term sustainable goals where everybody benefits and people are able to move together and socio-economic ills are brought to an end? Not that they can ever be brought to an end, but that you just improve the situation that's there currently. And we know that in terms of the South African delegation, the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, he's here and he's in a number of engagements today. He was in a meeting on the Coalition for African Research and Innovation, the Business Interaction Group, and later on this evening he's going to be participating in something called Africa's Road to Prosperity. And there's also a photo opportunity that we might get a chance to attend, we're not sure, where he's meeting the International Monetary Fund and the OECD. That's all.
All right, Nompu, thank you very much for giving us an update. And of course, we're looking out for that update later on in the evening in our business segment with Francis Head. Well, Nompumelelo Siziba coming to us live from Davos in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum.